They said I was too old to know the difference between truth and lies. They wanted me to sign my house away, to hand them my life's work. But my silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation, and the endgame had already begun. Sometimes justice isn't loud, it's patient. It's deliberate. And it hits harder than rage ever could. If you believe betrayal deserves truth, subscribe and share your own story of standing up when family crossed the line. The smell of roasted chicken usually filled my small house on a Sunday. It was a smell of routine, of quiet order. It was the smell of my wife, Sarah, moving through the kitchen. A comfortable presence. She's been gone 5 years now. But I still make the chicken. The routine is a bulwark against the silence. But today, the silence was broken. It was shattered by the bright, artificial enthusiasm of my son, Kevin, and the small, glowing lens of his telephone. He had propped it up on a stack of books at the end of the dinner table. A silent, unblinking third guest, Tiffany, his wife, sat beside him, her smile as bright and polished as the screen. They had arrived an hour ago. Not for dinner, but for content. That was the word they used. Content. As if their lives, and by extension mine, were empty vessels to be filled with images and words for strangers to consume. I carved the chicken, the old knife sliding through the meat with a familiar ease. The sound was real. The heat rising from the bird was real. Everything else felt like a performance. Okay, Dad. Just a little more to the left, Kevin said, adjusting the angle of his phone. Perfect. The lighting in here is great. Very authentic. Authentic. He said it as if it were a style he could select from a menu. I placed a slice of white meat on his plate. Then on Tiffany's, I said nothing. And we're live, Kevin announced to the phone, his voice suddenly louder, deeper. A broadcaster's voice. Hey everyone. Welcome back to the Kevin Sterling Experience. I'm here with my amazing wife, Tiffany, and the man who started it all, my personal hero, my dad, Michael. Tiffany waved at the phone, her rings glittering under the dining room light. I continued to serve the mashed potatoes, my movements slow and deliberate. So, Dad, Kevin said, turning to me. The phone still pointed in my general direction. We were talking about legacy last week on the channel, about the stories that make us who we are. And I was thinking, could you tell everyone the story of the West End warehouse fire from 2098? The one where you pulled those 3 people out. I want them to feel that courage. I put the serving spoon down. The potatoes were steaming on my plate. I looked at the food, not at the camera, not at my son. The West End fire. He called it a story. I remembered the smell of burning chemicals, the roar that sounded like a jet engine, the weight of a man's body as I dragged him through the smoke. I remembered the face of my friend, Jimmy, right before the roof collapsed. I remembered his wife's face at the funeral. He called it courage. I called it the day I lost a part of myself I would never get back. That's not a story to tell, Kevin, I said, my voice low. I finally looked up, not at him, but at the small, dark lens of his phone. It was a bad day. A lot of good men didn't come home. The air in the room changed. Kevin's broadcast smile tightened. It was Tiffany who jumped in. A practiced, seamless maneuver. My father-in-law is so humble, she chirped at the phone. What he means is, every day is a gift. And we should be grateful for the heroes who walk among us. Isn't that right? Dad. I picked up my fork. I did not answer. The silence stretched. Kevin, seeing the content well had run dry, quickly wrapped up his live stream with a flourish of positive affirmations and a promise of more inspiration to come. The moment he hit the stop button, the smile vanished from his face. The broadcaster was gone, replaced by the petulant son. "What was that?" "Dad," he asked, his voice sharp with annoyance. "I set that up perfectly. It was a perfect moment. People need to hear those stories. It's part of the brand." "My life isn't a brand." "Kevin, you don't get it," he said, shaking his head, a look of genuine pity on his face, as if I were the one who was lost. "This is how the world works now. It's about building a narrative. Your story, my story. It's all connected. You're not supporting my career." I ate my chicken. It was a little dry. I should have taken it out of the oven 5 minutes sooner. I focused on the act of chewing, of swallowing. It was a way to anchor myself in the real world, the world of dry chicken and quiet grief. While he spoke of narratives and brands, a few weeks later, the mail came. Among the usual bills and junk mail was the crisp, white envelope from the credit card company. I had given Kevin a supplementary card years ago, when he first went to college, for emergencies. I had told him, a flat tire, a broken boiler, a medical bill, a safety net. I slit the envelope open with a kitchen knife and unfolded the statement at the dining room table. My eyes scanned the columns of dates and numbers. There were no flat tires here. There was a one-day rental charge for a Porsche from a luxury car service in the city. There was a $400 charge for a restaurant called Aria, a place I knew I could never afford. There were multiple charges from high-end clothing stores, names I recognized from the glossy magazines Tiffany sometimes left behind. I sat there, looking at the list. It was a portrait of a life I didn't know, funded by a life I had painstakingly built. I remembered the phone call from the week of the Porsche rental. He had said his landlord was threatening to evict him over a late rent payment. I had told him to use the card to cover it. To not worry. I looked at the statement again. There was no payment to a property management company, only the sleek, expensive echo of a sports car. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and professional. "Hey, Dad. What's up?" "I'm looking at the credit card statement." "Kevin." There was no pause, no hesitation. He was prepared. "Oh, yeah? About that. It's all part of the business. Dad, you have to look successful to attract success. It's an investment in the brand. Think of it as marketing expenses. It's for the future of our family." "Our family," he said it as if we were a corporation. And I was the silent partner who funded the marketing department. "I see," I said. That was all. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lecture him on the difference between an investment and a lie. He had already built his narrative. There was no room for my facts in it. "Great, glad you understand," he said, relieved. "Hey, I've got to jump on a call. Talk soon." The line went dead. I folded the statement neatly in half, then in half again. I walked into my study and opened the bottom drawer of my father's old oak desk. It was empty, save for a few old pens and a roll of stamps. I placed the folded statement inside. It was the first piece of evidence, the first entry in a ledger only I would keep. The quiet of the house settled around me again. But this time, it was different. It was no longer just the absence of noise. It was the beginning of a plan. The house settled back into its quiet rhythm in the days that followed. The echoes of the party faded, leaving behind only the scent of a floral arrangement Jessica had insisted on leaving, which was now beginning to wilt on the sideboard. I threw it out. The digital photo frame sat on the end table, unplugged. Its black, glossy screen reflected a distorted, empty version of the room. I did not plug it in. I did not need a machine to show me pictures of the people I loved. Their faces were etched into the lines around my own eyes. Life resumed its gentle, predictable pace. I had my coffee in the morning, worked in my small workshop in the basement in the afternoon, and read in the evenings. But something had shifted. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was watchful. I found myself pausing, listening, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was a feeling I hadn't had since Eleanor's final weeks. That sense of impending, unavoidable change. In my study, on the corner of my desk, sits a small, polished wooden box. It's made of dark walnut, and the lid fits so perfectly that it makes a soft sigh when you open it. My father made it for me. Inside, on a bed of faded blue velvet, rests my Medal of Valor. It's not something I display. It's not a trophy. To me, it's a tombstone. It's a heavy piece of metal that represents the heat, the smoke, and the screaming. It represents Jimmy's last look before the steel beam came down. It represents the 3 people who lived and the 17 who didn't. It's the price of a memory I can never escape. I don't look at it often, but I know it's there. Its presence is a weight, a constant reminder. One afternoon, about a week after the incident, with the credit card, I went into the study to oil the box. A small ritual I perform every few months. I picked it up. It felt wrong. It felt light. My heart, which had been beating at a slow, steady rhythm, gave a single, hard thump. I opened the lid. The blue velvet was empty. The indentation where the metal had rested for 20 years was a perfect, hollow shape. There was no sign of forced entry. The box was not broken. The house was secure. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the empty space. I did not feel panic. I did not feel rage. I felt a profound, cold clarity. It was the same feeling I'd had in the warehouse, when the air had suddenly gone still right before the explosion. It was the feeling of knowing exactly what was about to happen, and that there was nothing you could do to stop it. Only prepare for the aftermath. I closed the lid of the box. The soft sigh sounded like a final breath. On Wednesday, Henderson came over for our rescheduled chess game. He brought a bottle of the bourbon I liked. We sat at the small table in my study. The board between us. The pieces were old, ivory and ebony, worn smooth by the hands of my father and his father before him. We played in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds, the soft click of the pieces on the board and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. That was quite a gathering the other night. Henderson said, not looking up from the board as he advanced a pawn. It was Michael's gathering. I replied, moving my knight. I was merely a guest. He nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He was a good friend. A man who understood the language of things left unsaid. We played on oney.com. After a few more moves, he looked up. Your son has a fine appreciation for timepieces, he said casually. He was showing a beautiful old Omega to one of his partners. Gold case. Leather strap. A real classic. Said it was a family heirloom he was looking forward to inheriting one day. My hand, which had been hovering over my rook, stopped. I did not flinch. I did not look up. I kept my eyes fixed on the board, on the black and white squares that represented a world of order and consequence, the Omega. My father had given it to me on my 21st birthday. It had been in the pocket of the charcoal gray suit I had worn to the party. I had checked for it before I left. A subconscious habit. It was there. When I had returned home, exhausted and hollowed out by the evening's performance, I had hung the suit in the closet without a second thought. The watch was gone. I had known it. Of course. On some level, I had known it the moment I realized my pocket felt lighter, but I had not searched for it. To search for it would be to acknowledge the theft, and I was not ready. Now, Henderson's words laid the truth bare on the table between us. As plain as the chessboard. It wasn't just a theft. It was a story. He had stolen the watch to steal its story, to wear my father's legacy on his wrist as a prop for his own ambition. Yes, I said, my voice perfectly even. It is a fine watch. I moved my rook. Check. A few days later, Sal, my old partner from the firehouse, sent me a text. It was just a link, with no message. I clicked on it. It took me to Kevin's Instagram page. The photo was professionally shot. He was standing in front of a sleek, modern building, wearing an expensive suit. And there, pinned to his lapel, shining under the bright sunlight, was my Medal of Valor. The caption read, "Channeling my father's courage to inspire you all to be heroes in your own lives." Number legacy, number bravery, number motivation. He had turned my ghosts into a hashtag. He had taken the heaviest day of my life and turned it into an accessory for his brand. The anger I felt was not hot. It was cold. It was the cold of deep space. It was a final, absolute zero. The love a father has for his son is a powerful thing. It can withstand disappointment, anger, even betrayal. But what I was looking at was not just betrayal. It was a desecration. He had taken something sacred and made it profane. He had taken my pain and turned it into his marketing campaign. And in that moment, the father in me died. The man who was left was someone else. A strategist. A man who understood fire. A man who knew that some blazes cannot be extinguished. They must simply be contained, and then you must let them burn themselves out. I picked up the phone. I did not call Kevin. I called Sal. He answered on the first ring. Sal? Michael here. Mikey. Everything okay? You sound different. Everything is as it should be. Listen, I need a favor. A professional favor. There was a pause. Sal was retired, but he had spent 20 years as a fire marshal. He knew how to find things people didn't want found. You know, you just have to ask, what's going on? My son, Kevin, he has a business, a life coach. I need to know what's behind the curtain. Sal, I need to know everything. The real numbers, who he owes, who he's promised things to. I need a full picture of his business. Sal was quiet for a long moment. He was a smart man. He understood the gravity of what I was asking. A father investigating his own son. I understand, he said finally, his voice low and serious. I don't want rumors. Sal, I want facts. Paper trails. Evidence. Whatever you can find. Quietly. You don't have to say another word. Mikey, I know exactly what you need. Consider it done. Thank you. Sal, I said, and the relief in my own voice surprised me. I knew I could count on you. Always, he said. I hung up the phone. The second piece of evidence was now being gathered. The trap was beginning to take shape. It would be a quiet trap. A patient trap. And I would wait. The click of the receiver settling into its cradle was the only sound in the house. It was a small, final sound. Like a lock turning. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the ghost of my grandson's sobs, a sound that would stay with me long after the memory of the hissing snake had faded. I stood by the phone, my hand still resting on the cool plastic. The game was over. The pretense of family, the charade of love and duty, had been stripped away, leaving only the raw, ugly mechanics of greed. They had used my love for my grandchildren as a crowbar to try and pry open my life savings. They had turned an 8-year-old boy's heart into a battlefield. There was no line they would not cross. I walked to my desk, the old oak desk that had belonged to my father. I did not look at the financial papers. I did not look at the photos. I opened the bottom drawer and took out a single, clean sheet of heavy bond paper and my fountain pen. The time for observation was over. The time for recording the facts. For building a case, for setting my own trap, had begun. I did not have to wait long. They arrived 2 days later, not with the aggressive impatience of their last visit, but with a slow, deliberate solemnity. Michael's car, a sleek, dark sedan that my money had helped pay for, pulled into the driveway as if it were a hearse. They walked up the path, not as aggressors, but as concerned caregivers. Jessica was holding a casserole dish covered in foil. Michael had a thick manila folder tucked under his arm. They were performing a new play, and the roles had been assigned. They were the dutiful children, and I was the pitiable old man in need of their guidance. I opened the door before they could knock. I did not invite them in, but simply stood aside. They entered, Jessica placing the casserole on the hall table with a sad, gentle smile. "We brought dinner." "Dad," she said, her voice soft with feigned sympathy. "We were worried you weren't eating properly." "I eat just fine." "Jessica," I said. We moved into the living room. They sat together on the sofa, a united front of compassion. I took my usual armchair, the one with the worn leather that had molded to the shape of my body over the years. The manila folder was placed on the coffee table between us. It sat there like an unexploded bomb. "Dad," Michael began, his voice a careful blend of concern and authority. "After our last few conversations, and after what happened at the party, Jessica and I are worried. We're worried about you." "Your concern is noted," I said, my voice flat. "It's your memory." "Dad," Jessica chimed in, leaning forward, her face a mask of earnestness. "You've been forgetting things. Important things. The watch you gave Michael at the party. The promise you made to the boys about Disney World. It's understandable at your age. But it's not safe for you to be managing everything on your own anymore." The lie was so audacious, so complete, that for a moment, I felt a strange sense of admiration. It was like watching a master craftsman at work. Only their craft was deception. They had taken their own thefts and betrayals and skillfully reframed them as symptoms of my decline. "So you've brought a solution," I said, gesturing to the folder. "It's just a precaution," Michael said, pushing the folder across the table. "A simple power of attorney. It's just a formality. Really, it would allow me to handle the bills, to manage the bank accounts, to make sure you're protected. It's to take the burden off your shoulders, Dad, so you don't have to worry anymore." I did not touch the folder. I looked at my son, at his handsome, earnest face, the face I had once seen as a reflection of all my best hopes. Now, I saw only the smooth, polished surface of a predator. I saw the man who had laughed in the background while I was being terrorized. I saw the man who had stolen his grandfather's watch. I saw the man who had used his own son's tears as a tool for extortion. My memory is fine. Michael, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying across the room with perfect clarity. It's good enough to remember a conversation I overheard at my own birthday party. The one where you told your investor that I was losing my faculties and that you were already taking over my finances. The color drained from Michael's face. Jessica's compassionate smile froze, then shattered. I was just simplifying things for him. Michael stammered, his confidence evaporating. And my memory is certainly good enough. I continued, my voice never rising, to remember a trip to Disney World that was never, ever discussed. A trip you invented to turn my own grandson against me. That was a misunderstanding, Jessica interjected, her voice suddenly sharp. And my memory, I said, pausing, letting the weight of the moment settle, is absolutely clear about where I put my father's Omega watch before I came to your party. It was in the inside pocket of my suit coat, the same pocket that was empty when I returned home. The silence in the room was absolute. They stared at me, their masks completely gone, revealing the raw panic beneath. They were trapped. Their lies had been exposed. Not with anger, but with cold, hard facts. It was Jessica who made the final, desperate move. She was a cornered animal. And she lunged. You're confused. Dad, she cried, her voice rising, laced with a desperate, theatrical sob. You see, this is what we're talking about. You gave Michael the watch at the party. You stood up and made a little speech about passing it down to him. Don't you remember, you said it was time? It was the most profound betrayal of all. It was an attempt to erase my reality, to overwrite my own mind with their fiction. They were not just thieves and liars. They were gaslighters. They were trying to convince me that I was insane. I looked at her, at the false tears streaming down her face. I looked at my son, who was now nodding along, grasping at the lifeline of her lie. And in that moment, any last, lingering ember of fatherly affection I might have had for them turned to ash. I stood up. My movements were slow, deliberate. I picked up the manila folder from the coffee table. I did not open it. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The cool afternoon air filled the hallway. I turned back to them. My voice, when I spoke, was not angry. It was empty. It was the voice of a judge passing sentence. Get out. They stared at me, speechless. Get out of my house. I repeated, and do not come back. The next time we communicate, it will be through our lawyers. They finally moved, scrambling to their feet. They scurried out the door like the vermin they were, without another word, without a backward glance. I closed the door behind them. I slid the deadbolt home. The click was loud, final. I walked back into the living room and picked up the phone. I knew exactly who I needed to call. The game was over. Now, the end game would begin. The heavy oak door closed with a soft, definitive click, shutting out the roar of their departing car and the ugliness they left in their wake. The silence they left behind was different from the one before. It was clean, empty. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, my hand still on the deadbolt. The house was mine again. The air felt lighter, as if a long festering sickness had finally been expelled. I walked back into the living room and picked up the phone. My hand was perfectly steady. I knew the number by heart. Hayes and Associates. How may I direct your call? I need to speak with Attorney Hayes. I said, my name is Michael Sterling. It's urgent. The drive into town was quiet. The familiar suburban streets, the manicured lawns, the houses with their welcoming front porches, all seemed to belong to a different world. A world I was now irrevocably separated from. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands steady on the wheel. I was not a grieving father anymore. I was a man with a purpose. Attorney Hayes's office was on the top floor of a glass and steel building that reflected the afternoon sky. It was a place of quiet competence, a world away from the messy, emotional chaos of my own home. Evelyn Hayes was a woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I had always appreciated. She had handled my wife's will years ago, and I trusted her. Michael, she said, her voice calm and professional as she ushered me into her office. Your call sounded decisive. We sat in the heavy leather chairs opposite her mahogany desk. I placed the file Sal had compiled for me on the cool, polished wood. It was thin, but dense with facts. It is, I began. I am here today to build a firewall. She listened without interruption as I laid it all out. I did not raise my voice. I did not allow emotion to color the facts. I spoke with the dispassionate clarity of a man reading a damage report. I told her about the last 3 years, the financial drain, the constant stream of emergencies that notingeverthepublic.com. I told her about the birthday party, the live stream, the story of my life being sold as content. I told her about the stolen Medal of Valor and the Instagram post that had turned it into a marketing prop. I told her about the credit card statement, the proof of his lies, and then I told her about the confrontation that had just occurred. I told her about the manila folder, the power of attorney, and their final, desperate attempt to declare me incompetent by weaponizing my past trauma. They tried to convince me that my memories of the fire, my grief for my fallen brothers, were a symptom of my decline. I said, my voice flat. They tried to use my scars as a key to my bank account. As I spoke, I saw Attorney Hayes' professional demeanor shift. The slight, sympathetic tilt of her head disappeared. Her expression hardened. She picked up her pen, her movements precise. Michael, what you're describing is a textbook case of elder abuse, financière exploitation, and psychological manipulation, she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the quiet of the room. We need to address this on multiple fronts, and we need to do it immediately. That's what I was hoping you'd say. She pulled out a fresh legal pad. Let's start with immediate protection. I am going to draft a durable power of attorney and a healthcare proxy for you today. We will name your friend, Sal, as your agent. This will legally prevent anyone else from making financial or medical decisions on your behalf. It nullifies their entire strategy. Next, we will send a formal cease and desist letter to both Kevin and Tiffany, warning them that any further contact, any attempt to slander you, or any approach towards you will be met with legal action, including filing for a restraining order. The words were like a balm. Legal action. It moved the conflict out of the murky, guilt-ridden realm of family and into the clear, black and white world of the law. And finally, she continued, her pen scratching across the page, we address the foundation of this conflict, the inheritance I want them to have nothing. I said, not a single dime. We can do that, she replied, a faint, grim smile touching her lips. But we can also make a statement. We can ensure that the legacy they tried to steal is preserved forever, and the wealth they coveted is used for a purpose that is the exact opposite of their own greed. We will revoke your current will and create a new, ironclad living trust. She leaned forward, her eyes focused, explaining the mechanics of the fortress I had asked her to build. The trust will hold all your major assets, the house, your investment portfolio, your savings. Upon your passing, the assets will not go to Kevin. The house will be donated to the local fire department, to be used as a temporary residence for new recruits or firefighters facing personal hardship. I thought of my home, the place where I had raised my son, now being used to shelter the next generation of my brothers. It felt right. The entire financial portfolio, she went on, will be used to establish a new charitable foundation. We can name it whatever you wish. I thought for a moment. I thought of the way they had tried to use my trauma against me. The First Responders Healing Fund. I said, its mission will be to provide funding for mental health and PTSD treatment for firefighters and their families. It was perfect. It was more than I had hoped for. It was a final, decisive checkmate. It did not just punish the guilty. It honored the very pain they had tried to exploit. And Kevin, I asked, what does he receive? He must be named in the will to prevent him from contesting it on the grounds of being forgotten. She explained, we will leave him a specific, personal item, something of his own. I knew exactly what it would be. I signed my name on the thick, important feeling paper, my hand steady. Each stroke of the pen was a deliberate act. Severing a tie, building a firewall. I was not just signing a legal document, I was signing a declaration of independence. I was reclaiming the life I had earned. When we were done, Attorney Hayes walked me to the door. Michael, she said, her professional tone softening for the first time, you have done the right thing. Your peace comes first. The law is on your side now. I walked out of the glass and steel building and into the late afternoon sun. The city continued its normal rhythm around me, but my world had been fundamentally altered. I drove home in silence. But it was a different kind of silence. It was the quiet, peaceful silence of a battle that has finally been fought and won. Months passed. They were quiet months. Sal and I played chess every Wednesday. I tinkered in my workshop. I never heard from Kevin or Tiffany again. The cease and desist letter, I assume, had been effective. The flow of money had stopped. And with it, their interest in my life. The final move was mine to make. I had Sal keep track of Kevin's career. I knew about the big seminar he was planning, the one he was calling his Legacy Summit. It was to be the crowning achievement of his brand. Held in a downtown hotel ballroom. I bought a ticket online under a false name. I did not attend, but I made sure the pieces were in place. On the night of the summit, I sat in my quiet kitchen, playing a game of solitaire. I imagined the scene. Kevin on a brightly lit stage, a headset microphone on, pacing back and forth. Behind him, a giant screen with his logo. He would be telling a story, my story, the story of the West End fire, polished and sanitized for mass consumption. A tale of heroism with all the blood and fear washed out. He would reach the climax, his voice filled with fake emotion. And then, At the precise moment I had arranged with the audio-visual technician, a man whose own father had been a firefighter, the screen behind him would change. It would not be his logo. It would be a simple, black screen with white text. A legal notice. Effective, immediately. The entire estate of Michael Sterling has been irrevocably transferred to the First Responders Healing Fund. All claims of inheritance or financial representation are null and void. I imagined the silence in the ballroom, the confusion, the slow, dawning horror on my son's face as his borrowed legacy evaporated in front of hundreds of his followers. At that exact moment, a courier would be arriving at his home. Tiffany would sign for the small, heavy box. It would be his inheritance. The only thing he would ever receive from me. He would open it later that night. After the humiliation, after the angry phone calls from his investors, inside, on a bed of black velvet, would be 2 items: the Medal of Valor he had stolen, and beside it, my old, dented Zippo lighter, the one I had carried for 30 years. There would be a small, handwritten note. "You wanted my story so badly. Here. You can have the fire that came with it. The rest is for the real heroes." I laid down a red queen on a black king. The game was won. The house was quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence was truly peaceful. The fire was out. People ask if I feel guilty. It's a fair question. The grief is a constant companion. A quiet ache for the little boy who once drew stick figure pictures of our family holding hands. That grief will never leave me. But guilt, no. Guilt is for mistakes. What I did was not a mistake. It was a survival instinct. A necessary amputation to save the rest of the body from a sickness that would have consumed us all. Love, I have learned, is not an endless well. It is a garden. It must be tended, protected from weeds. And sometimes, you must be willing to prune the branches that have become diseased, no matter how much it hurts, so that the rest of the garden can live. If you are reading this, if my story resonates in a place in your heart you don't want to admit, you know this: a boundary is not a wall to keep love out. It is a fence to keep destruction at bay. Sometimes, the most loving thing a parent can do for themselves, and even for the child they can no longer help, is to say, "No more." It is a terrible, quiet, and necessary act of self-preservation. Do not wait until your own story is stolen and sold. Do not wait until your scars are used as leverage against you. Your peace is not a currency for someone else's chaos. Protect it.